And so it went. Mankind ignored all of the warning signs that seemed so apparent in retrospect. Instead of looking for solutions, most simply buried their heads in the sand while expecting a good outcome. Too few wanted to know what was really going on in the world, instead choosing to simply hope for the best and pray that someone else would save them. It goes without saying that this savior never came. And while most fell into the category of relying on others for their own salvation, some actually sought out solutions to the problems that they all faced, even though so many of the problems were made out to be so much more complicated than they really were. After all, control is better maintained in the presence of chaos, and chaos is easier to create when the event or situation is complicated or perceived as such. One example of such complications was the way in which the masses were conditioned to treat the rich and/or the elite. This minority of individuals continually got richer and richer, no matter the circumstances and no matter what was happening in the world. One of the greatest and worst examples of this occurred during a pandemic caused by the COVID-19 virus. Because in the couple of years in which the virus ravaged the entire planet, the richest Americans got richer, doubling their wealth in that short amount of time. An increase made possible due to the fact that the leaders, especially in the Western nations like the United States of America, made certain that all of the money created out of thin air at that time was given to the wealthy first and at the cheapest rate possible. American financial leaders were able to accomplish this because the US dollar was backed by nothing except the might of its military, while the dollar was at one time backed by gold, and the printing of it was limited by the amount of gold that the United States had in its possession. This was no longer true after 1971, when America came off of the gold standard. And for this and many other ill-conceived reasons, America's leaders gave out $5 trillion, the majority of which went to the ultra-wealthy. This they did while proclaiming the imbalanced distribution a necessity to shore up and sustain the American economy. When one looks back at the impact of this distribution of wealth on the rich and everyone else, it becomes apparent that there was a much better way to distribute that money, as detailed and spelled out in a warning from an author named Chris Osman. At that time, Mr. Osman posited that providing most of that $5 trillion to those who lived in the middle class and below would have done much more towards maintaining America's economy. His rationale being that had this money been given to the people in the middle class or the poor, they would have had to have spent it on necessities, not hoard it as the rich surely did. The trillions given to the middle class and poor for survival would in turn eventually have made its way into the coffers of the rich. They do, after all, make everything. But on its way there, that money would have circulated through the economy instead of stagnating in some vault or some fake offshore investment. Given out as that money was, however, it only served to cause runaway inflation. Inflation that many economists and all politicians would deny, while everyone except the ultra-rich had to endure. Along with insights into the inequitable distribution of wealth, this author offered examples like the following as proof to back up his claims. Imagine if instead of giving $3 trillion to the rich, that money was instead given to the poor, for the rich have no need to spend it. After all, if you already have millions or billions of dollars at your disposal, what would you need another billion or even million for? You can already buy all the clothes you need, all the cars you need, and all the houses you need, whereas someone in the middle class would still need to spend that money just to survive. In the end, however, even those who heard what this author had to say about such things chose to ignore his warnings and even looked upon him as a conspiracy theorist, even when he stated that there was a reason why there were more and more conspiracies and fewer conspiracy theories. For those who did not understand what he was trying to say, Mr. Osman would explain that as time goes by, the truth comes out about the activities of those we have called leaders in the past. What was once classified is now declassified, exposing the truth that lies beneath the lies we were told in the past. For instance, America's longest war prior to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan was the Vietnam War. After decades of hiding the truth, it finally came out that the event known as the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which supposedly sparked the Vietnam War, never occurred. Oh, there was a Gulf of Tonkin, but the incident to which it was related and the supposed cause of a war that lasted 10 years never happened. And so it went with one conspiracy after another. Time would pass, and those activities or policies of which American leadership took or adhered to were very often discovered to be neither moral nor necessary. Even when giving the excuse of helping the economy, oftentimes the only economies that were helped were those of the rich. As one of the most decorated Marines in history, Smedley Butler wrote, "War is a racket." In his book, he explained how the wealthy always seem to start wars, justifying them as a necessity for resources or to benefit or to secure their own nation, but they never seem to be willing to forfeit their own sons or daughters for such causes. The rich never seem to be harmed in any way by most wars they supported or oftentimes caused. While true in Smedley Butler's time, this fact became ever more apparent once the internet allowed people to share information among themselves. It was no longer easy for the authorities or the powers that be to hide the secrets they normally hid in the past. When at one time the elite had gotten away with such immoral behavior as that which was done by people like Jeffrey Epstein, one of the world's biggest chomos, and the truth of his actions were covered up because of those it would expose as being accessories to his crimes, there were few places that this type of conspiracy could be hidden. As for the money that was doled out to the wealthy during the pandemic, that was also shown to have been given out in an immoral and unjust fashion, what adding $5 trillion to America's economy did was to increase inflation exponentially. And since most of the money went to the wealthy, it was everyone else who suffered from the increase in costs of everything while wages remained stagnant. Mr. Osman tried to point out that it made little to no sense for the masses to ignore the fact that their government had added trillions of dollars to the economy, which inflated the prices of everything. Too bad few, if any, listened to him. Neither his books nor his petitions nor his blog were ever cited as sources for solutions to some of the biggest problems that mankind had ever faced. For had these things been acknowledged, some of the greatest impacts that man faced could have been mitigated or avoided altogether. An example of one of his petitions was the End the Job Creator Lie petition. In that petition, Mr. Osman called for an end of preferential treatment given to the rich when paying taxes. The argument at the time was that the rich deserve to get bigger tax breaks because they create jobs. In essence, it was proclaimed that the job of the wealthy was to create jobs for the rest of us. What Mr. Osman pointed out was that in a time when wages are stagnant and usually put far too many people below the poverty line, which he denoted as poverty wages, those designated as job creators were terrible at their job. Oftentimes, Mr. Osman would state, if the job of the job creator is to create jobs, then those job creators who create bad jobs are bad at their job of creating jobs. What Mr. Osman proposed as an alternative was to only offer those wealthy who actually created jobs those tax breaks afforded to all wealthy people at the time. And instead of offering them all the same tax break, those breaks would be weighted in a manner that incentivized those who created better jobs to do so. In other words, the rich who created jobs that paid well would get greater tax breaks than those who created jobs that paid poverty wages. In this way, Mr. Osman argued, the country would benefit from the benevolence of those elite who actually helped communities thrive by paying them well. As for those elite who created jobs that did not pay well, they would not receive as much of a tax break, which in turn would have provided more revenue for the government. This extra revenue would then in turn provide greater safety nets for those in need. What had become the norm in America, where more and more private charities were popping up and being funded by the masses, as opposed to being funded by revenue collected from taxes, the elite would pay for more assistance wherever it was needed. Mr. Osman pointed out that there was no losing under such a scenario. For those elite who did seek to assist their fellow Americans and improve the economies in which those fellow Americans lived, they would be rewarded. For those elite who did not seek to help out their fellow Americans or to innovate or to provide a more equitable economy, they would not suffer, but neither would they benefit from their inactivity. And their money did not simply make them more money instead of them having to actually start and run a successful business. And then there were other solutions offered by Mr. Osman, one of which being the means to increase American innovation and technology. For this, that author pointed out that making college more affordable to more people made your country stronger than doing the opposite. He pointed out that if you limit college or higher education or technical trade schools to fewer people because the cost of such education is prohibitive, you limit the brainpower of your nation. Oftentimes, he would provide the example of 100 people. In this example, he would point out that if you limit your education or higher education to 1 out of that 100 people, that means that you are missing a big portion of those who might actually move your technology forward. He would then say, now imagine increasing that number from 100 people or 1 out of 100 people to some percentage out of 300 million people. Now, if you take that 1% of the 300 million people, which is a little shy of the amount of Americans there are currently, you are limiting your innovation to 3 million people out of that 300 million people. Just by the numbers, this makes little to no sense. And if you look at the way in which America has fallen down as far as technology and innovation is concerned, it became ever more apparent as the years passed. America ceded its position as one of the highest countries in regards to technological advancements to countries like China, because American corporations loyal to no nation sought to make products cheaper in the East. And when China began to excel and create its own technology, surpassing what America could offer, this became a big problem in the West. Where America was once a manufacturing superpower, it had become the place where only consumers existed. Before time, Americans became a nation of YouTubers selling merch and other products to other YouTubers. America became the land of the gig economy. It became the place where the middle class, which once thrived and propelled America to being the richest nation to ever have existed on planet Earth, to one in which fewer and fewer people could afford a house, a car, clothes, or even food and water. And as for medicine and medical assistance, that had all but become a luxury for far too many Americans to think that their nation and their leaders had their best interests at heart.